Sorry, I'm here, but I'm traveling from England.
Delaine, I would like to know, how do I pronounce your surname correctly?
It's Le Bas. It's got a
Le
silent.
Bas. It's like French. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
That's okay.
Okay.
Hi, Delaine. Long
Hi,
time no
Oliver.
see.
How are you? You good?
Good. Everything perfect.
Good.
And how are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
Where are you?
I'm at home. I'm in so I'm on the south coast at the moment. I've been in Glasgow the last couple of weeks.
Okay. For the COP26.
Yeah.
And how was it?
Well, I was with the Minga Indigena that were there, so it was quite a different experience for me because I wasn't actually in the whole COP thing. I was sort of on the fringes of it with other people. So yeah, it was very interesting though.
Right.
We are online right now, I think.
Yeah, we are already online. Welcome to the depot. Most of our audience is at home at the moment, watching the YouTube live stream, because we had quite a difficult COVID situation again here in Austria, also in Vienna. But nonetheless, I'm very, very happy that we can all meet in a somehow hybrid situation here in the depot. I'm welcoming Oliver Ressler and Nina Schädelmeier, who is doing the moderation of this talk. And we assume Delaine Le Bas. Nina is an art historian, art critic. She is the editor-in-chief of the cultural magazine Morgen. So she will do the moderation of the talk and introduce the two artists. Please, Nina, I give you the word. Thank you for being here, and I'm very happy to this talk now. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. Hello, everybody. I would like to introduce the artists in brief. After that, I think we will, both of you will tell us something more about your work. And after that, we will discuss. And afterwards, I think it will be fine to hear your questions. Okay, so first I would like to introduce Delaine Le Bas. Delaine was born in Worthing, UK in 1965, and she studied at the St. Martin's School of Art in London. Delaine is a cross-disciplinary artist. She's creating installations, performance, photography, and film. And she focuses on issues of identity, race, gender, sexuality, and exclusion against whoever is perceived as the other within society. Delaine was one of 16 artists who were part of the first Roma pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2007. And she created an installations, a traveling installation, I guess, with the title Safe European Home, which she worked with her late husband, Delaine Le Bas, on. And she's also initiator and co-curator of the Roma Biennale, which was this year in Berlin, I guess. Okay, Oliver, hi.
Hi.
Oliver is artist and filmmaker, born in Styria in 1970. He's making installations, outdoor works, and films on topics like economy, climate crisis, democracy, migration, and resistance, social alternatives. And he did many shows in different museums, like, for example, Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade, the Kunsthaus Graz, the MNAC, which is the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Bucharest, and he took part in more than 400 group exhibitions, like, for example, at the Reina Sofia in Madrid and the Van Appe Museum in Eindhoven and the Centre Pompidou in Paris. Now you are traveling, I think tomorrow next week you're traveling to Zagreb, where your show at the Museum of Contemporary Art is opening, hopefully in the end of November, I guess. And there you will show works concerning your works about climate justice movements, which you created, I think, since 1994. And you also, Oliver also had a project, has been working on a project since 2019, funded by the FWF in Austria, which is a science fund called Barricading the Sheets. And I think, yeah, the ice sheets, barricading the ice sheets. Okay, so welcome both of you. And I think now maybe I can ask you, Delaine, to tell us a bit more about your work. And yeah.
Okay, is it okay for me to share screen? Because I've got a few slides that I could show. So I'll just do that quickly. So I'll just go into this presentation that I've got somewhere on here. Here it comes. Okay, let's show it. Okay. So yeah, I'm based in the south coast of England, but since 2006, I've been predominantly working in Europe. And so I've created a lot of installations, and in 2010 we were approached to come to Vienna actually to produce an installation. So this was the collage that I first made of what the installation might possibly look like, and this was the installation that I created with my late husband Damien, and it was Safe European Home with a question mark. And we decided that we would build like a sort of a shanty town, not necessarily a Roma shanty town, because obviously many people are homeless or refugees are living in these sort of similar sort of conditions. So we just wanted to bring it right into the city centre as opposed to it being on the outskirts, so that it was somewhere where everybody could see it and experience it. But it was also to create a space where other people could also present things or do performances or do talks or whatever they wanted to do, because I think also it's about this idea of being in public space and taking this sort of work onto the street where you have a conversation with people. And for us, coming from the place that we come from and being from the English Gypsy community, but the European Roma community, for many people, when you're in these situations in a public space, it's the first time that many people have actually had a conversation with someone like myself, face to face, that isn't a conversation that's completely based on a media representation or something that may have been read in a newspaper or something. So it's a completely different type of conversation and situation that you set up. So this is what it actually looked like outside the Parliament building in Vienna. It was there for a couple of weeks, and we did lots of talks and things, and it was an ongoing exhibition. So it not only was in Vienna, but it's happened in other cities, but it didn't stay as it was. It was made out of what things we could find, or it completely morphed and changed all the time. So it wasn't the same thing. And there's bits and pieces of it left, or we let people take it to recycle it into something else as they wanted. So really, as an artwork, there are some things that exist of it, but most of it is scattered, as it would be if it was something that was constructed in this way. So it's also about making work, I suppose, that is sort of has that sort of vulnerability in a sense. It's not about just being in a white cube art space, even though I work in white cube art spaces as well. It's about this other way of working that's out on the street and in different positions. And of course, a lot of things have changed since we did this. Unfortunately, sadly, my husband died. That's one thing that dramatically has changed everything for me, but also with being in the UK and with Brexit happening. Because at the time we did this, we didn't know that Brexit was coming as well. So everything has changed. And then for everybody, we've had the COVID situation as well. So many things have changed for many people. And the idea about borders and boundaries with something that is completely doesn't see any borders and boundaries and can just move in a completely different way must, I think, have some sort of impact on how you think about what borders and boundaries actually are. So I put this photograph in because this was a portrait that actually my son took of me there, and it's with a solidarity flag that was actually made by my friend Scott Banasabadon, who's a Anishinaabe from Canada. And we met actually in Derry when I took another installation of mine to Ireland called Witch Hunt. And we've been working and collaborating since that time, which was in 2009. So my way of working has always been about connecting with people who are talking about similar things or coming from similar places, but not necessarily in the same sort of locations. So I'm interested in sort of, I would say, the bigger picture and how we're all connected in what's going on or what's happening to us, depending on what our circumstances are or where we're positioned in society. So me and Scott have continued to work. I actually went out to Canada and went to Owen Sounds, and we did a series of posters together, as well as me presenting an exhibition that had some work in that we worked on together as well. And we came up with this, and it came from Scott originally, which was this idea that underground is where the heart is. So it was about this idea of being earthed, but being connected to the earth and what's going on with that as well. And that many people have been displaced because of these other elements coming in or other things happening that disturb that in some way. So we did these series of posters. This was about 2014 actually, so it's some time back now. And then so this was also another one of the posters, and this was put on a public archives thing from the Canadian Archives, and it's written in Ojibwe, which is Scots Indigenous language, and Romani. So it's also this idea of talking about things in different languages as well, and being able to, when you're putting these works, because this was in a disused shop that was on a street in Owen Sounds, it's also this idea that people are experiencing a different words and different languages, which is also something I'm interested in, because I'm interested in how words are used, how language is used to exclude, how language is also used to control. New work that I have in an exhibition currently in London is about linguistic engineering, as I call it, which is this idea of the language that is used, having just been in Glasgow with COP26 going on, the language that governments use to talk about doing things, but actually when it comes to doing things is something else, and how they use that language to avoid most of the time doing the things that they should be doing, or they confuse people with the language they're using or exclude them, and it's all done deliberately very often. So this is the newest piece of work that me and Scott did together, and this was for the Roma Biennial that's taken place in Berlin, as Nina mentioned, over the past year. But it's also, we decided to make a series of posters, so we engaged with lots of different artists to make posters, and these are also available as downloads over the website. So the idea was that it took place on the streets of Berlin, but also you could sort of have the Roma Biennial in your home if you wanted to, because you could print the posters off A4 size, or you could display them wherever you wanted. So in a way that the Roma Biennial this year expanded out all over the place. This we did again, it's underground is where the heart is, because this came up as for the last phase of the biennial. And that was to do with the fact that the Roma Memorial that has been such a struggle to get in Berlin is currently possibly facing some disturbance from a potential metro realignment that's going on in Berlin. So also this idea that even when you get a space and you get land to do something, it doesn't always stay where it is. So yeah, so we were talking about this. This is just a photograph of my late husband, Damien, with one of his pieces of art that he actually did when we were on a residency in Finland. And the reason I put this in is because when we were deciding what to do for the Roma Biennial because of the pandemic, and it was really difficult, one of the things that I decided to do, working with one of my students from the University of the Arts in Berlin, where I was guest professorship for a year, was the fact that one thing that nobody knew about Damien was that at the house that where I am now, we have an amazing garden that he created, and it was something that he was really interested in, which was planting and growing things. And so we decided to do a project that would run alongside the biennial and be part of the biennial, which was called Nomadic Seeds. That we would do an internet-based project where we could connect with people in different places and talk about growing things and growing and plants as a resistance. And also for people to be able to talk about healing plants as well, because obviously even during the pandemic, many people couldn't access medical care for different reasons. So we wanted to be able to share knowledge amongst different people who are in different places. And one of the things we also did was we worked with the USMI and in Colombia, who are, so it was a planting resistance thing as well. So it's this idea of food as a resistance, because obviously if you can eat properly, you have some resilience to everything. But also this idea that in different places of the world, people are being killed also because of their resistance, because of what they're doing in terms of planting or trying to stop people devastating where they live. And this leads me on to where I've been in the last couple of weeks. I've been in Glasgow because it was the COP26, but I've been with the Minga Indigena, who are the indigenous people from the Americas. And in this photograph here, we have Mariela, Cindy and Adrian, and they're all from Peru and Chile. And it was quite amazing to spend time with people talking about what's actually really happening to them and how we can help. And the one thing that I was told was just to spread the message, because that was the best thing that I could do. So one of the things is that we should be listening to people, listening to the guardians of the planet, not the profiteers, and that we should try and do what we can on a local level, as well as maybe protesting, but actually think what we can do in our own communities or in our own environments to do things. And yes, the world is on fire, so I'm just going to end with that really, and I'm not going to say a lot else, I don't think, because I think I've probably said enough, and I think it's probably better if we talk about other things. I have got a film I could show, but I think I'll leave that for now. Okay, so that's about it. So that's just a little brief overview of things that I've been doing and I have done and I'm working on at the moment. Yeah, so I think I'll finish there. Just stop the share.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Delaine. Yeah, we will talk about your works maybe later again. And Now, please, Oliver, tell us more.
Yeah. So I just put together a few slides that I think all relate somehow to democracy and participation. Actually, this probably applies to the majority of all works I did, so it was quite difficult to make a choice here for this presentation. So I would like to start with a slide with a piece based on a text. Imagine a democratic system in which the hopes of social transformation are not buried in the ballot box, but form the base for active participation in political decision-making based on equal rights. So this is a piece that was produced as a banner and as a billboard in the framework of my project Alternative Economics, Alternative Societies, on which I worked on between 2003 and 2008, which is an archive of 16 films I worked on during the period of this time. Each of these films focuses on one concept, one model of how to replace representative democracy and capitalism through a more inclusive and democratic concept. And these are interviews carried out with political analysts, historians, economists, and other people. So here you see some installation shot of the project. These are installation shots from the Biennial de Sevilla from 2006 that was curated by Akteur and Ressler, which shows a quite late version of the piece. It's an archive of altogether that takes altogether 8 hours to watch all these videos. So it involves some investment also in terms of time to access this work. The project also exists in the format of books. So this here is the English version. There's also a German version and the Spanish version of this project, which consists primarily on transcriptions of some of the videos, edited transcriptions. That's a German version of the billboard in relation to an exhibition in Karlsruhe that was carried out in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. So what I've found really interesting is when in 2011 this Occupy movement and Square movement emerged, as this was a movement where you could really see a form of democratic organizing, where decisions were being made in assemblies, where people directly occupied squares and were in a kind of prefigurative politics. They also tried to organize themselves in a way as they would probably see as a form of organizing we could maybe consider to apply for the society at large. So the project has several versions, but this is a 3-channel video version which shows 3 different locations and movements on which I worked. So on the left-hand side, we see the 15M, 15M in Madrid, in the middle, the Syntagma Square movement in Athens, and on the right, Occupy Wall Street in New York. And all of these videos are based on the assemblies in which these movements organize and where decisions are being made. But in addition, I also carried out meetings with 4 or 5 people of the movement whom I would consider as central protagonists of the movement. and who talk about different ways of how the movement emerged, what are its aims, what are difficulties, how decisions are being made, how international cooperation takes place, and things like that. So as a free channel video installation, it was presented primarily in art exhibitions. So this is an installation shot from an exhibition in the Reina Sofia in Madrid, where it was part of the Playgrounds exhibition. But in addition, this work was also presented as a one-channel version, as a film in different events organized by political organizations, by leftist unions, by progressive NGOs. And the work is also available online in my YouTube channel, on my webpage, on my Vimeo account, or also on some cultural institutions' websites. So when you think about democratization of the society, there's no way to exclude the workplace from this democratization. Therefore, I'm also very interested in different attempts that already exist in the here and now, where we can see first steps of democratizing work sites. So I started to work on this topic in 2006 in a Latin American context in Venezuela. Still nowadays, the majority of worker-controlled factories you find in Latin America, primarily in Argentina. But in a cycle I worked on between 2014 and 2018 in collaboration with the Italian political analyst Dario Azzolini. We focused primarily on worker-controlled factories in Europe. And that we now also find worker-controlled factories in Europe can also be seen as a result of the effects of the financial and economic crisis of 2008, where many businesses and factories got closed and where workers did not see any other possibility to continue working in their factories, in the jobs they learned, they were trained, then to take over the responsibility over the factory themselves. So very often also these worker-controlled factories started from a fight over better working conditions, higher payment, higher security or safety standards for the workers. And in some of these cases, these struggles, they radicalized. And those finally, some of these workers in longer struggles managed to get their hands on the entire factory, kicked out the bosses, took over the control of the factory, over the production, and continued producing. So actually, production can be seen as a form of resistance. And all the decisions of the workers, they are being made in assemblies. And so you see in these factories also only very flat hierarchies. So in some of these factories, like these are images from the Officine Zero in Rome. But in some of these factories, like in Skopje, which is a factory that emerged after a former Unilever tea production factory that produced Lipton tea, got more or less democratized, and the workers started to produce their tea on their own and kicking out Unilever. Now we see, for example, a difference between the highest and the lowest wages in the factory. It's exactly 100 euros. So the not highly trained worker is earning only 100 euro less than the director or the engineers who are working there. And this, of course, also points towards how I think many of us imagine a future society, so that also these huge hierarchies that go hand in hand with just a completely unfair distribution of wealth and income could be overcome just through different modes of organization. So here we see tea that you can nowadays get through the direct distribution of Scop tea, but you can also find it in local supermarkets. One of the most famous brands has the number 1336. You can see it here on this slide, which refers exactly to the length, to the duration of the worker struggle. So the struggle continued for 1336 days, which is more than 3 years, I would estimate. So these good things sometimes take a bit of time. They take a lot of commitment. They can only be successful with a lot of solidarity from families, from neighboring communities, solidarity also from other progressive businesses, organizations, unions, and other actors in civil society. Here you see an installation shot. In the meantime, I produced together with Dario Azzolini 4 of these portraits of worker-controlled factories in France, in Italy, and in Greece. And they are presented also as 3 or 4 channel video installations in an art context, and but in addition are being made available for unions and different political organizations for screenings. And yeah, in the past few years, I focused primarily on the climate justice movement, which is a major movement that also does not only focus on climate justice, but also has a democratization of the society in mind, and also a redistribution of wealth and capital and resources, or like knowledge. I focused, for example, on a cycle of films on mass civil disobedience. Like you can see here, for example, the blockade of Europe's second largest coal harbor, which is located in Amsterdam, where coal primarily from Colombia or from other countries in the global south is being imported and burned in the different states of the European Union. But within the framework of this project, I also focus on things that happen as a result of some of these cases where civil disobedience is being lived as a form of resistance. And one of these examples, for example, the ZAD, which can be seen as Europe's largest autonomous region. It emerged from resistance against a new planned airport for the city of Nantes in France that started already decades ago. And around 2008, there was a climate camp at the ZAD, and there were many empty farms, just because this company that was planning to build the airport was trying to kick out all the local farmers there in order to build the airport. And these activists of the climate camp, they reoccupied these abandoned farmhouses, and started their own projects there. Police tried to evict this place numerous times, but it always failed, also due to the solidarity of neighboring communities. In the Operation César in 2012, for example, 30,000 people from the neighborhood came there in order to defend the SAT against the police who tried to evict the occupiers. And there was another attempt in 2018. And yeah, the occupation still continues. And you also can see here a society, how people try to set up new ways of how to live together, of how to work together. All the decisions are being made in a democratic manner, in a direct democratic manner through assemblies. Yes, and I think I come here to an end, as I do not want to occupy too much of the space here. I want to close this short introduction with another image, with another piece, which is part of a film of alternative economics, alternative societies. It's a quote from the Subcomandante Marcos of the Zapatistas, so one of the films I carried out in Chiapas. Imagine shaking this land from below, steering it up, turning it upside down to expose all of the plundering and exploitation, and then spreading it out again without a top and without a bottom, except for its mountains and valleys. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Thanks both of you for giving us insights into your work. Starting from that, I would like to kind of put it on a maybe more general level, asking both of you the question, because actually our talk should revolve around Teilhabe, participation. Maybe you could describe what could participation in art mean in this context, or in context of your work. So how could it help democratize society? Or yeah, so maybe, I don't know, who would like to start?
Delaine, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very I think that it's about trying to have conversations and different types of dialogue with people. And I think that if you make work in different ways, or you even participate with other people in different ways, and you collaborate with people in different ways, then that opens up the potential for that. But I think you have to be open for it. And I think you have to not only just, because I think that in a, you know, I show in lots of different types of spaces, and I work in lots of different types of spaces. And I think that that allows those sort of conversations or collaborations to develop. Because I think that if you're only just within a gallery space, then that is one particular type of audience and one particular type of conversation you have. But it's still an important place to show in, because it also resonates in different ways through different levels of society. So to me, it's about being able to try and communicate in as many different ways as you can with as many different people as possible, because then it's like this sort of, it's spreading in different ways. So it's a bit like spreading lots of seeds about in order for lots of different things to grow. And some things will grow faster than others. Like things grow naturally in different ways. Some do grow faster than others. So it's for me, it's about working in different ways with as many different people as I can, who want to sort of have those similar sort of conversations or develop those ideas together. So I think that's what I try and do, and I always try and be open to that, really, as much as I can. So yeah, I think that's sort of where I am with it, I suppose. So yeah.
If you get into conversation with people, if you're doing an installation, did you meet them after that as well, or do you stay in contact with them? Or
I mean, I try and also have lots of people ask me, well, how come you're doing this now in this place with this person? And it might be that, we might have met 20 years ago and we just had a conversation, we've just kept in touch. And also I do this thing where I write to people, so we send each other things in the post as well. So it's different ways of communicating with people. So it's not just via the internet or just in a space, it's also writing things to people or having different experiences with people as well. And so to me, it's about always keeping this sort of these different dialogues going, so that it's like the work that I was showing that I've done with Scott. We met in 2009 and we're still working together now. And so to me, that's really important, to keep those conversations but those artistic works going together as well. I like this idea of building proper relationships with people that I meet. So it's not like I've just done a sort of art project and I've dipped in and I've left and then that's it, nothing else happens from that. Because I feel like it's really, to me, it's about how I'm sort of experience, how I'm living, and I also want to see a change in things. We're living in very strange times now, but there's been a lot of lead up to where we find ourselves now, and it's like I feel like people can collaborate and work together to make a difference. But as Oliver was saying, sometimes it takes a long time for people to work together and work things out, but you have to be prepared. I always say to people, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you have to pace yourself, and you have to be prepared to work at things over a period of time.
Yeah. So I think,
yeah, in my work, there's participation on so different levels, right? I mean, on the one hand, there's an aspect of participation when I carry out the works, as I work a lot with film, and film is never being carried out by a single person, but it's always being done in partnership with different people who take over different responsibilities. But then the subject of so many of my films is actually how people organize differently. And this, of course, depends a lot on people who participate in different processes. And if you document these things, you also require a certain level of participation. So, for example, there's a process of negotiating terms of collaboration involved of each of these films, because you cannot simply go in a worker-controlled factory and start filming, but you have to convince the people involved in these processes that what you're doing there will result in something that will benefit their struggle, which is also super important for myself. So I could not consider doing a work on one of these struggles without producing anything out of it that would also support the struggle, at least in some aspects. Yeah, and sometimes there are certain conditions that are being asked. Sometimes they would also maybe contradict what I was planning originally. So this participation also kind of shapes my artistic work and has a direct effect on the result. So I have now a solo exhibition at the Camera Austria at the moment, Barricading the Ice Sheets. One of the films is based on a recording of an assembly I carried out with in Madrid with several groups of the climate justice movement. In this assembly, the participating members, they are all delegates of different groups, and they were planning an act of civil disobedience. According to the Spanish law, they are organizers of kind of an uprising, and each of them could be imprisoned for a couple of years. So they were risking quite a lot in order to giving me access to this assembly, and I was filming the entire thing, like 4 hours. But of course, there was a very clear agreement, a set of terms of what would be possible to film, under which conditions what I filmed it would be published. And we even involved lawyers over a period of 2 weeks on several occasions when we decided on this set of terms in order to make this filming possible. But finally, it could happen. And of course, the participants in the assembly, even though, of course, I could see them, but they had to be made anonymous. This had, of course, an incredible effect on the artistic outcome of this project. But I think that's also amazing. And I'm also very happy that this process has taken effect on the work.
What does it mean for the protagonists of your works and your films to be part of an artwork?
I think for most of them, art does not have such a big meaning. So it's, I mean, I'm also—
Let's be realistic.
Yeah, I introduce myself usually as an artist and filmmaker, as my works are also being presented in cinemas and in film festivals. I think it's fair to show up as an artist and filmmaker. And usually they check out what you did previously, and when they see that it has a certain commitment, and when they feel that this is a way of filmmaking that supports the struggle, then the majority of them will participate in such an endeavor. Not all of them, but the majority. I mean, this film, I was working, and I showed one image or a few images. I was working on forms of civil disobedience in relation to the climate justice movement for years. I was working on a cycle over 6 years of these films. And during this entire time, I was planning to not only show what's happening on the street or in the coal mine or in the coal harbor where the blockades take place, but I was always also interested in order to show how this is being organized, because this is also where you can really learn a lot. Also, groups in other towns and other states. But over years, I failed in my numerous approaches when I was in touch with people and I told them, do you know what I would really like to do? I would like to record the assemblies in the background. And then, well, you know, I mean, I really like your work, but I mean, this is really impossible. Well, I'm not really a person who gives up easily. So finally, I succeeded.
Yeah. I think for both of you is public space an important issue, and as you're working, you're showing work in public space, but you're as well creating it in public space, and I think it's now a very strange situation when the pandemic came. I think we got another notion of public space, maybe. So could you maybe describe, or what is your view on this? So how do you think did the pandemic with all its lockdowns shape the public space or influence it? Delaine, you had the Roma Biennale recently, so maybe, yeah, I think you.
Well, we decided with the Roma Biennial that we would, as I mentioned a bit in the presentation, we decided that we would do it online, but put it out in the public space in the form of posters. Yeah. And then as the lockdown came off, as the lockdown was coming off, we also got there was a financial incentive to also be able to use public space on the metro and things like that. So we could actually do like these video presentation things on the metro, but also use the billboard space and things like that, but also in public space using those. And because many people weren't using that space, we got a discount on what we could pay to use those spaces, as well as doing normal sort of fly postering where it shouldn't be happening as well. And then we also put all the artworks available for downloads on the internet. And when public events could be held, we had posters printed which we could give away to people as well. So we tried to approach it in all different ways. And then also we did a number of events online via Zoom and things. So I was just mentioning earlier when we were setting up this morning that I'm not a technical person at all whatsoever, but I sort of embraced technology in a way to be able to make work and collaborate even more with other people in different parts of the world. So actually, in many ways, it's opened up other possibilities with the work in a different type of public space. So I think that it's sort of seeing the potential and trying to use the positive aspects of things in ways that enable things to take place and allow other sort of collaborations to evolve from that, or other sorts of work. So, I've, recently been sort of projected into a theatre space from this space here as a performance because I can't travel. So and also the sort of the nomadic seeds thing that I was talking about, we're talking, we did a whole thing where we were involving, the Esme from Colombia, but also, we got like someone who's a participant from Bangladesh as well. So it's also opened up. Now that wouldn't necessarily have happened had this situation not arisen. Maybe those sort of things wouldn't have happened in the way that they've happened, and those connections wouldn't have taken place. So actually it's opened up many things in terms of different types of public space and also different types of participation as well.
Do you think that people got more aware of the importance of public space during the lockdown? Because I think it's so important to have non-commercial public space. So is that something which you had in your focus, or?
I was experiencing it very differently because I'm in my house at the moment, but I've got a new partner and they've got a very small apartment with no outside exterior space at all whatsoever. So for most of lockdown, I was there, and there was this massive argument in the UK consistently going on all sorts of social media and in the newspapers and on the news and everything, because there was this thing about people being on the beach or masses of people being in the park. And it's like, well, if you haven't got any exterior space at all whatsoever, then the public space is really important. And obviously the erosion of public space as well, which is something that's continually gone on, even in the UK, like small areas that belong to everybody being taken for different reasons. I think it's made people acutely aware of the space that they need. And we know that under COVID, particularly in the UK, and I can speak for the UK because I'm here, and they've been trying to put this new police crimes and sentencing bill through in the UK, but this also has things about trespass and stuff in it. So it's also making it very difficult. It's going to make it even more difficult for people to even access land that actually they should be able to have access to. So, there's a massive amount of pressure now on the spaces that are available to people, those also being taken. So, the idea of civil disobedience, and this also affects protests. So, part of this bill is that, as one person, I might not even be able to protest here. So, this whole thing is quite, it's taken a sort of much more sinister turn under these circumstances as well, when these sort of spaces are needed even more really for people to be able to go in when they can't access them.
Yeah. So what was your impression?
I started to do art in the mid-1990s, and at that time I carried out works primarily in public space, interventions in public space, billboard objects, posters, or newsletters or magazines that are being sent to households and things like that. And in the past few years, this kind of changed. I mean, while I'm still doing from time to time interventions in public space, I think where I commit most of my time and energy are actually works that kind of deal with public space, but are not necessarily being presented in public space. Mm-hmm. So this entire works on the climate justice movement, they kind of document different actions that all took place in public space, usually in a context that it goes beyond, which is in our society being seen as legal. And I try to bring this material I record, sometimes myself, sometimes with a team, also depending on different varying contexts. And I try to bring this together in order to initiate a larger discussion. So when this pandemic started, I was in the middle of work and planned work, and several of the things I was planning to do, and I was already negotiating with activists, I could not carry out simply because the health measurements also restricted certain things and made also things impossible that were maybe possible to do before. I mean, for example, there's a group in the Netherlands who was planning to shut down the annual shareholder meeting of Shell. Mm-hmm. And that would have been one of my films, but even illegal things that are being considered illegal do not take place in times of a pandemic, just because the annual shareholder meeting of Shell was moved online. And it's also possible to shut down an online meeting, but it requires different techniques, and it's something different. So they were not prepared for this kind of technique. They were prepared to putting their bodies physically to make it impossible for for those people who have the shares to access the building, right? Yeah, so this had quite an effect. Of course, it was also that in March, April 2020, when the lockdowns, at least in Europe and I think also in North America, started, like the number of exhibitions I had dropped nearly to zero. And I think there was one point when I realized, well, now I haven't got a single of my works that is kind of accessible for people who visit museums or art exhibitions. And I knew, well, there's one billboard I have at the moment presented in Berlin, and that's maybe the only work that's accessible for now. If we exclude maybe the films I had online on my webpage for a moment. But that was also the time when I was trying to think about, well, shit, I mean, what to do. The ways, the sites I used to present my work, they disappeared, right? Also, I had a new film completed on carbon capture and captivity. I was working at the largest site where this technique is being done on an experimental level in Norway, and I also had an entire touring tour in Norway related to this new launch of the film, but which was also cancelled, of course, So I was thinking what to do. Well, one of the things I was trying, and I was starting quite soon, is that I started a YouTube channel. I always hated YouTube. I still hate it, but I kind of felt it's something we cannot ignore anymore, right? Because YouTube is not only the largest video platform on the globe, it's also the second largest search engine. So people who might check out climate action or climate emergency or whatever should maybe also have a and they do this on YouTube. It would maybe also be something that is meaningful, that they could maybe also find some of my films if I put them there. Yeah, of course, such decisions also have their negative effects. My channel was also shut down in August this year for reasons YouTube is not ready to lay bare. So it's still disclosed, the reason why they shut it down. But yeah, this happens when you work with private entities that have their own ways of censoring things and making things public, and also hiding things from the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yesterday, I read something which is a bit depressing. I mean, it's interesting, but also quite depressing in this context of pandemic and the freedom of art. Because there is an NGO called Free Muse, and they are documenting restrictions of artistic freedom all over the world. And their recent report, referring to last year, documents an analysis of nearly 1,000 acts of violations of artistic freedom. And they state that oppressing artists' voices had not stopped with the restrictions on cultural events and art institutions worldwide because of COVID-19, but on the contrary, to some extent, it even intensified. And I mean, I ask myself why this might be the case. Can you imagine why this happened? Or I mean, it really sounds a bit scary to me. But yeah,
possibly because I think that, you know, the bill that I was talking about has obviously gone through, and many people, it's over 360 pages long, so a lot of people wouldn't want to sit and read 360 pages of a government document. But I also think that many things have been, and many artists are always paying attention or working with these sort of things that are happening. And so it's like, it's the other news, it's the other stuff that's going on, it's the other things that are happening. And I think that because there's been such a news, you know, there's a certain type of news that is wanting to be out there. And obviously, if you're working with the other news that's going on, then that's potentially, for any government, seems to be a problem. And I think that it's always been there, but I think under this set of circumstances, it's probably highlighted it even more. And so, like, you know, Oliver stating like his YouTube channel was shut down. This seems to be like a regular, I mean, a lot of artists have had, if they've had work on these sort of public spaces, their work for various reasons has been shut down or taken off, because it's you know, and there's often, you're not really given a reason for it, but you sort of know what the reason is because it's not going along with the current dialogue of what would want to be talked about. You know, I mean, there's huge problems with many things, and I think also what the whole pandemic has done is it's the many inequalities that there are in society are even more highlighted in a way, but they don't want people talking about that. I mean, I think it is it's just one of those problems. So of course, if artists are dealing with these sort of topics, then they're going to be shut down. You know, it's often the case. It's always been the case. Why would it be any different now to what it's been historically? Really, you know. So I think that it's just what it is. But you just have to find other means and other ways of doing it. And I think that, you know, art, you know, many people are quite resilient, so they find other ways of doing things. You just have to navigate the territory and find somewhere else of being able to make the work or collaborate with people and do other things. And so therefore having really extensive long-term networks and collaborations with people, I think this is the sort of time when really it sort of pays off of you being able to work in as many different ways, being flexible, and being able to use all different sorts of spaces and all different sorts of alternative spaces as well.
I think, a global health crisis is, of course, an emergency. And I think emergencies are always being used by those in power in order to carry out certain changes that those in power were planning already to introduce before. And so the health crisis and for the emergency is being used as a kind of a carrier in order to enable it to get this transformation. So we could see different regimes like Bolivia, Morocco, India, Chile, introduced very, very repressive measurements on the people in these countries. And they tried to carry out also certain political changes those in power were already planning before. And the crisis was just used because they saw now there's a chance, there's no possibility, there's a ban of demonstrations. You can easily arrest people without more or less no reason, maybe just because not wearing mask or so, or to pretend that this is the reason. And this gives them a big power. And I think in some states and in some region, the leveling down of the freedom to do art production might have been also been the case. Yeah, so freedom of right was restricted, I assume, in several regions. There's also a quite interesting web page and newsletter called Art Leaks. So like WikiLeaks, but Art Leaks, focusing on different forms of censorship in the art world. And this already exists for more than 10 years. And it's a quite interesting source of repressive measurements and actions carried out from major art institutions, for example, not paying workers, not paying artists, breaking contracts, bullying certain cultural producers.
In the Article 13 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, there is stated the art and sciences are free. But as Free Muse reported, 26% of the cases of artists who have been persecuted and even sued are cases in Europe. So, and we heard of artists like, for example, Bart Staszewski, who is from Poland, and he criticized those so-called LGBTQI free zones in Poland, and got sued, I guess.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, that's really, really bad. I mean, they are part of the European Union. So did you ever fought restrictions yourself, or yeah, I mean, what could we as citizens living in the European Union, yeah, how could we react? Or I mean,
I personally experienced numerous restrictions and cases of censorship of my work, and the majority of them took place in the European Union. Maybe one reason might be because I'm most active and have the majority of my presentations in the European Union. But at the moment, there is still a court case going on due to my filming of a blockade in the Czech Republic in 2019. So they simply sue all people there, and they give a shit if you label yourself an artist or journalist. And I have both proof of being an artist, and also have a press ID. So they just arrest you and then sue you like all other participants in an action of mass civil disobedience. I had my work stolen in countries like Norway, which was more an act of censorship than an act of theft, because this theft of my work was introduced by a campaign in the media against my work, and it has also to be seen in this context. So it's a debate that took also place during the pandemic. So it's a very recent one. I produced a piece called Oil Spill Flag. And yeah, there were like 35 articles within 2 weeks, and the piece was stolen twice from a flagpole that's 15-meter high. So it was not so easy to steal, but with a certain will, there's probably also a way. I had my work censored here in Austria. I won a competition in 2011 from the TKI, an independent organization, a piece I wanted to show during an election campaign in the province of Tyrol. And it showed a photographic image of mountains in Tyrol, and I wanted to show it while also all the political parties have their election advertisements in the city. So on top of these mountains, I wanted to put the term "elections are a con" in German, which is of course a quite well-known quote from 1968. And so as an effect of the financial and economic crisis, when all the debt of banks got bailed out by taxpayers' money, even though 99% of all populations all over the European Union were against the bailout of banks, I felt that maybe a necessity to bring up this quote again and see how this is working in a public context. So this money I should have been given. I still was not being given, and in this case, I went to court and sued the ÖVP, the largest party in the government in Tyrol, and yes, so there are continuous interactions on a court level, censorship cases.
In Austria. Yeah.
In Austria and
is,
different countries in the European Union.
So
nothing new.
Elaine, do you have similar experiences, or?
Well, we were at one point we were supposed to be taking the Safe European Home to Budapest, but it got cancelled because the people that were trying to organise it said they didn't think we'd be safe there. So that's because they thought of what we were, not only because of what we were talking about in the installation, but also because we're Roma, and they didn't think they couldn't guarantee our safety there in the city. So I think that it's just, it depends who you are, who you're dealing with, what it is you're talking about. I think that, you know, I think the more that government is involved in art institutions and the less other spaces there are to work in, then of course that influences what can be shown, because they have ultimately they have the ultimate say, because they're holding the purse strings of the institution. So this is also about the sort of how you keep independent spaces available for people to be able to show work in, and how do you maintain that in a society where, say for example in London, where rents are so extortionately high that you can't, it's impossible to have independent art spaces, for example, for works to be shown. So more and more it becomes about who's got the money to run the space, and how those power and financial dynamics dictate what gets seen and what doesn't get seen. So it's almost like you have to try and fight for every single space that you can possibly hold that enables other things to be seen, other voices to be heard, really, in a way. So that's also very important, that those sort of spaces are kept in a way. But you know, it's not easy when a space is not easy to find and not easy to maintain and not easy to even finance, because it's the finances around it don't enable that. So that's why sort of alternative spaces or other ways of working or other ways of showing work or other ways of getting to participate with each other in making work even are really important to maintain.
So that's a good point, because actually my last question before opening to the audience would have been, so that actually the entire art business is characterized by exclusions, and it also reflects social hierarchies, and in museums and in institutions. I mean, you have pay gaps like everywhere else, except for yeah. So, and there has also been a lot of artwork done about all that. This whole institutional critique in the 19th revolved about that. So, and Delaine, you're trying to find other spaces and trying, I think, yeah, you try to escape that. Did I, or do you also, I mean, yeah,
well,
so what's...
I've sort of used, I sort of don't underestimate the potential of any space. So very often people said to me, oh, why, you know, like, why are you showing there? It's like the middle of nowhere, or it's like, it's this, but it's like, it's, to me, it's really important, because you don't know what conversation is going to happen there. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what's going to happen from that space. So it's like any space has the potential to ignite something else. So I think that is why I've never, you know, you know, at the moment, so the work that I did for the Berlin Biennial, I did get some money from the Arts Council in England to fund that work. But that work at the moment has been on show at my local, you know, I don't live in London. I live in a small seaside town that's on the south coast of England that's very conservative. But the one thing this museum, because I've been working with them for some years now, they don't have, as a local small museum, they don't have a lot of money to bring artworks in. But we've shown the Safe European Homework there. And in doing that, we had a whole series of talks and discussions, and lots of people locally engaged with it. So over the past, say, 8 years, we've done a number of different exhibitions there. And so, yeah, it's only a local small space, but what it does is it engages the local population in an international conversation about things that otherwise wouldn't take place. Now, that work was in Berlin Biennial. It's in Worthy Museum now. It's going to come back to Germany, and it's possibly going to be going to other bigger art institutions within the UK. So for me, this idea of like the sort of going into all these different spaces, as well as like me filming things that are in my back garden, or enabling people to come and see me maybe do a performance there, as well as do a performance, say, in a major art institution. It all has it all needs to take place. It's the same as all the different conversations, you know, conversations need to take place on a local as well as a global scale in order for things to make a difference. So I think that this is what so in order to sort of get over the hierarchies, I think you have to also be prepared to, as an artist, to work in different spaces as well. I think it's really important, because they're getting less and less and less in a way. So you've got to also create them if you can as well. So, you know, what I'm trying to do, you know, one of my ideas here at the moment is that the house that I've got is like to make this a space that is more accessible. So when it is accessible and it is possible for people to access it, that can be, but also some of the archive material that we've also got, that me and my late husband collected, can also be available, as well as in this context, but in a bigger context as well. So it's like opening it up. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's bigger.
So Oliver, you showed in important big museums and institutions. So what's your view on?
I think there are lots of different art places, right? We have artist-run centers, we have Kunst halls, we have museums, we have biennials, we have galleries, and all of them kind of function quite differently. And there are some that reflect a lot also the exclusions and the undemocratic way of how our society is being organized. And some function more on the few, but some like role models of how you would hope that larger parts of the society are being organized. So I think it's quite hard to say general about how art institutions, how inclusive or exclusive or undemocratic or democratic they function. It's a really wide field. Over the years, I think I've worked together with all of these sectors. So, in general, I think it's really important, especially in these times when I think also art institutions are more and more under attack. And I think this might also increase in times of an ongoing pandemic, when we have a situation when still the majority of art institutions receive in some way public funds, that when institutions increasingly will have to stay closed due to health reasons, then there might also be a pressure from funders to withdraw funds or reduce funds a lot. So there's a huge danger that this crisis is being used in order to shut down institutions. So at the beginning, when the pandemic started, I think there were numbers from the US that 1/3 of all institutions in the US would be in danger of never being able to open again after the shutdowns, just because the public also will reduce funds. And there is no way in order to earn money through renting the space or to selling tickets or getting some income through the shops. So I think in general, I think that we are in a moment where we need to defend institutions in order to against the different attacks from the outside. But of course, when you defend institutions, you should also have a say in how they organize. And there are super important initiatives like Strike MoMA at the moment, right? Where there's a huge attempt from people who are outside of MoMA, but maybe are audience or people who supply certain services to influence and to shape of how institutions act. And the Strike MoMA action at least led towards that one of the CEOs, one of the CEOs that was sitting in the advisory board of the MoMA had to resign, right? So it is also possible to introduce, through actions, certain positive changes.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe there are some questions. I don't know if. Yes.
I have one question. I have a short question to Delaine. I hope you can hear me. Maybe you repeat it, Nina.
Delaine, do you hear Sarah?
Yeah, just I think I can just hear her. Yeah.
Maybe you take.
Maybe you.
Or maybe you can repeat it.
Okay.
After the changing situation with Brexit for us in Great Britain, and are there, I mean, at the same time, there was the pandemic with Brexit, and how's the financial situation for us?
Delaine, shall I repeat it? The question was, how did things change? Did the Brexit change? Yeah. What?
The Brexit.
So what
Brexit.
What influence did the Brexit have on?
What, on the arts or on the situation? Well, it's. I mean, it's. I think it's quite complicated because obviously we've got COVID, so that's restricted people's movements anyway in terms of being able to move from one place to another. You know, like maybe under normal circumstances I would be there with you, but instead we're doing this via Zoom. So that's one. That's one thing. The other thing, obviously, with Brexit is this whole the whole paperwork and the whole thing of artworks coming in and out of the country as well. So that's another layer to it. In terms of institutions, I have to, I'm going to sort of talk about something that Oliver's just touched on. I mean, I know a curator at an institution, and she said, you know, even when they first opened up, the amount of people they used to get into the art institution in one day, it took them 5 weeks to get the same number of people through the door. So this is also the other with the restrictions and with also people not visiting. So I think that also with art institutions in particular, I think they're one of the things that when people visit a country, they're one of the things that people go to. So also you've got a lack of numbers just in terms of people who are going from one country to another to do things. How it's going to influence or restrict artists and artistic work, particularly if you make things like I do, like installation, where normally you would go and visit somewhere and be in situ making the work and doing the work. In terms of permits and things, I've yet to tackle that one because I've just been here throughout the whole pandemic, and the furthest I've been is actually up to Glasgow for the past 2 weeks. So it's actually the 18th which was yesterday. It's exactly 2 years yesterday since I returned from Berlin, and I've not flown or been anywhere since then. So that's that, and I'm probably just, you know, I'm just one person of thousands of us who's in the same situation. And I mean, I don't know how, even just for artists in general, just the pandemic, let alone Brexit, has affected them. I know for many artists here, you know, many artists in this country were told to retrain by the government when the pandemic took place, in terms of, you know, being able to make a living. But yeah, it's a difficult one with Brexit. I mean, me and my late husband saw the potential problems with it, even when it was being discussed, let alone when it happened. So yeah, I mean, it's I think we're yet to see the full thing of it, because I think at the moment it's so sort of overshadowed by what's happening with COVID, that we're not really seeing. I think there are effects, but it's not fully manifested itself yet in terms of the real outcomes of it. So yeah, so that's where I am with it. I've just decided that what I'm doing is I'm sort of embracing the technology, as I said earlier, because it's a way for me to get into places without actually having to travel and navigate all of that at the moment. So I'm just working in different ways. So it's opened up new possibilities with my work, I would say, in some ways. But yeah, I hope that's answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much. We got another question from our speaker from last night, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. Actually, a three-part question somehow. First is in a kind of institutional bullshit cycle that artists very often subscribe to. The other one is the problem of art washing, and the second is about the problem of institutional democracy. So the bullshit cycle would be like kind of more according to Graeber. Curator files an application, gets some money, artists serve the purpose of the application, all is a closed circuit, everybody's happy, but one doesn't need to care about what happens to the public, or whether it means any interest beyond the institution problem. This is even made graver or deeper by very often that happen in the circumstances of art washing, like institutions that use artworks in order to, how to say, overcome or smoothen out otherwise very repressive forms of government. So the artists make themselves part of that, how to say, even in their artworks with best intentions, they make themselves part of a very repressive government very often. That's another problem. And the third problem is that what I encounter with artists very often when I talk about democracy, they always seem to be very fond of democracy, apart from the work that we post. But okay, they always seem to be very fond of democracy. When it comes to apply democratic, how to say, procedures within the institutions that would include the public, they generally shy away from that. They're afraid of it. These are
Thanks for your questions. Yeah, interesting remarks. So, who wants to answer?
Let all of us say something first, because I just spoke.
Yeah, I mean, the art washing thing is, of course, something we have to take seriously, and I observe this for quite a bit now. But I think there's also a big tendency, and there's also a huge movement against it. I mean, the most well-known, if you think nowadays about the past Whitney Biennial, was probably the resistance against the guy on the board who is the owner of this company that produces the tear gas, right? So there were major articles writing about the tear gas biennial, not the Whitney Biennial anymore, right? I mean, you see this shift, that the shift goes away from a focus on the art productions you have there in place in an art exhibition towards the art institutional framework in which this is being presented, including the interests of the funders and those who use their presence in these art institutions in order to art wash themselves, to use the term you have been using. And I think this is something super important. And when you win such a struggle, then maybe some people who might have an intention to also art wash their corporate crimes through donating money to art institutions, that they will try to find something different. And yeah, I think these boycotts of artists, of major art institutions are something really essential, but we also have to use it very carefully. I think not all of these boycotts maybe are being used in the right moment or use the right targets. I stop for here. Maybe you would like to focus on another aspect.
No, I sort of agree. I think that it's I think that also it's, you know, sometimes artists can use the space that they're given sometimes in an institution, or sometimes when they've given these things to actually highlight things. But I think it's a case of balancing, really, because you want to, you know, everybody needs spaces of some description to be able to work within and show, but you also have to think about maybe how the frameworks need to be changed thoroughly in a way to really make a change in the whole thing. So it's like it needs really looking at the whole thing. And I know that talking to many people here in the UK, you know, they are really in a lot of collections that even a lot of institutions hold, they're having to seriously address what they've got in those collections and how they address that to balance it from what's been going on historically and previously now. So there's a lot of, but also it's like not everything can move as fast as everyone would like it to either. So sometimes it's like things are happening, but they're not going at the pace of, you know, a scroll on a mobile phone. Sometimes it's a lot slower than that. It's like reading a page of a book rather than it flickering in front of you that quickly. So it's like sometimes it's also realizing that things are happening and they're going at different paces. So one thing's going at this pace and one thing's going at another, and we have to sort of judge that and sometimes be a little bit patient with it as well, I think.
You want to reply?
No, actually, there's still a democracy issue that is the core of our conference, so to say. That artists, the contradiction basically that artists very often are pro-democracy as long as it doesn't touch the very institutions that I would say that gives space for the work, as long as it doesn't touch the public especially. Because let's put it like that, they're busy enough to serve curators and collectors or to have another issue with the public, let's say. So with the exclusion of the public, how to say, in the institutional operations, artists tendency, it's my experience, seem to be very happy, or they seem to be afraid of the public judgment.
I think there's just so many different artists that it's a bit complicated to generalize. I would say I know artists who are really super happy to have public and to exchange with public. So I could not experience to produce works without getting feedback, because the feedback of the public helps me in order to realize what I did, and it's the base of the upcoming production. So I really need I need the audience in the screenings, I need the audience in the exhibitions in order to continue working. And so all of these works kind of fail in certain aspects, right? And this failure is also the basis of the future work.
Okay, so I think if there are no more questions, okay, I think one last question. We have 4 minutes.
How much do you intervene artistically when you, for example, interview, when you said you chose protagonists of these different movements, and do you ask them questions or do you just let them talk and try to stay as an artist, I guess, like in the background?
Yeah, I try to avoid interview situations. So what I did in the past few years primarily is that I do not put a single person in front of a camera anymore. So I have enough of that. So I prefer to have groups of 5, 6 people sitting together. And of course, I decide and propose a certain frame and a certain dramaturgy. I issue a certain set of questions, which are usually also known in advance. They don't come as a surprise. And this conversation, this is then the base on which I try to construct a narration in a filmic work. And of course, there is influence on all different levels. I mean, there's first the influence when I decide of who will be those people speaking in front of the camera. There are different ways of how I select those people. That's also depending on the context in which the work's taking place, but usually I try to have a different kind of diversity and gender balance, and maybe also diversity in terms of age. Then, of course, there's also the influence then through the choice of in which setting I interview people or establish these situations from where people can speak. And then, yeah, there's this influence and this in the editing process. I mean, there really the film is being built, and yeah, you choose certain things, and you decide also not to use certain things. And I always had the problem with the term documentary that has often been applied for my work, just because, I mean, it's so much a process of construction of a certain set of what is being described of reality. And for sure, this is not a reality. It's a film. It's an art project you're working on.
Okay, I think we will finish. Thanks, Delaine and Oliver, for talking to me. Thanks here in the depot to the audience for your attention, and thank you out there. Yeah, I think have a nice day.
Thank you. Ciao, Delaine.
Bye.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Ist doch nicht gelaufen.
Die Minute.
Ja.
Ich weiß nicht,
Ein Kind abholen.
ob noch mehr. Bitte?
Musst ein Kind abholen.
Nein, das gar nicht. Ich bin nur